was with when I did the Coast Guard. One was an Apache pilot, and one was a Kiowa warrior pilot.
Yeah.
And the typical line you always hear: "Love the flying, the love story sucked."
Well, yeah. In fact, the flying story started to suck. I mean, it was a fight, I'll tell you. So,
I
are we
bet.
ready to do this?
Yeah, and it's going to be a real casual interview
Okay.
because this is going to be shown during our Monday show where we do Military Monday, where we do a slideshow presentation
Okay.
of the film. And but I'm also probably going to keep some of this for one of my Dangerous Nerds episodes too,
Okay.
because one, it's sort of, it's still weird to me that one, I've known you for as long as I've known you, and that I work for you. And I mean, you and Julia have been like your family to me. Just it's amazing having you in my life. And anytime I've told Julia this, anytime I get down, I remind myself, oh my God, I know Dale Dunn. And then she wrote on my Facebook page like 10 years ago when I wrote that, she wrote back, and Dale Dunn knows you.
Well, that's right.
But it's exciting to get to do this, Skipper, because getting to interview you this last time was really just wanting to talk about you. But this one's going to be focusing on the work you did, because this film, I don't know why it tanked. I really don't, because I enjoy the shit out of this movie, and it's always bothered me. I don't know if it was bad marketing, because everybody turned in a really good performance. I love the script. And also, by the way, I'm friends with Sean Young, and I'm trying to get an interview from her about this film.
Well, look, I think the truth of the matter is this movie got to screen in one of the strangest evolutions. It damn near drove me out of screenwriting. I was approached by two retired Army officers, Step Tyner and John Swanson. And they'd been in Army aviation and were big fans of the Apache longbow, which was state of the art at that time. And they pitched me to use my influence, such as it was, to take this to some producers and see if we could make an Army aviation rotorhead movie. And the concept was exciting to me. What I envisioned when I began to write the thing. By the way, I took it to Keith Barish and Arnold Kopelson, who I had relationships with through prior movies, Platoon and a number of other things. And so they were willing at least to listen to the pitch that I had. But we just started immediately running into problems with this thing. As it was originally envisioned, it was a fight in the Middle East, and it was two Goliath helicopters and two really hot shit pilots that were going to face off mano a mano, or helicopter to helicopter, if you will, and this incredible fight in midair. It was essentially helicopters dogfighting. And I thought, well, how cool is that? We have, Top Gun had come out, and I said, well, we need to do this for the Rotorheads. And so I began to write this thing, and I wrote it and took it to Barish and took it to Kopelson, and they said, well, it might have some merit here. And then the Axis came out. I mean, everything was wrong. Everything, they couldn't do it, and they couldn't do it without the Army. And I said, well, look, maybe we could deliver the Army. And I went to General Thurman and several people. He was TRADOC at that point, Training and Doctrination or Doctrine Command. And he liked it. He said, this will be great for Army aviation and all that sort of thing. Well, fine. Now let me get back and try to sell the concept. That was the problem. Nothing seemed to go as I envisioned it, or as Tyner and Swanson and I envisioned it. They wanted it moved to somehow become part of the war on drugs, and that didn't help. So they didn't want Central America. They wanted a better bad guy, somebody that they could point a finger to, and the next thing you know, we're in Central America, and I'm rewriting all of this crap, and I'm literally rewriting scenes by the hour to try to get this acceptable to everybody. And everybody had a take on the thing, and then we started figuring it out that maybe the Army Aviation had somehow gotten involved in the drug trade or fighting the drug trade in South America. I said, okay, back to the drawing board, and I started in South America. And we didn't even have a director aboard at this point. And the Army was being a little chilly about the whole thing. They wanted to make sure that they were represented correctly, and I was on their side. But it was just a horror story. And we finally got the Army aboard. The Army said, okay, look, we'll cooperate here. We'll give you some Apache longbows, and we'll give you some pilots, and we'll fly for you, and we'll let you use bases and that sort of thing. So I said, well, here we are. The problem was, in my initial vision of this thing, it was an Apache longbow pilot, hot shit guy, and his gunner, and facing off against an Mi-24, a Hind, which was the big deal in the Warsaw Pact at that point. And so that's how I saw it. Well, nobody could get, nor could anybody mock up at that point, an Mi-24.
Right.
So we ended up in this real horrible compromise, in my view. And I was also acting in this thing, so I was fighting to preserve my situation. We had Tommy Lee Jones and Sean Young and Nick Cage and me and a couple of lesser known entities. And they just couldn't get the Mi-24. And I said, well, what are we going to do? I mean, this can't be Goliath against David here. The longbow represents Goliath. And we got to have something that's equal, or something that people are going to believe, the two giants clashing in midair over rotor noise. And we couldn't find that. And so the compromise was to take a smaller helicopter. I don't even know what the hell the thing was, but it was
a BO-105, Dale.
There you go. Thank you. But I
think it's the one nicknamed the Scorpion, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
It certainly did not mash up against in the view of in the visuals. It didn't match up against the Apache longbow. It looked like the Apache could just swat it out of the air. So we had to then come up with something that made it special. And there was missiles that they were thinking, homing all the way missiles, and a particularly a mercenary pilot that was flying for the drug cartels and all that sort of thing. So frankly, it was never what I wanted it to be, what I intended it to be. And the Army, God bless them. I mean, they took us down to Fort Hood, Texas, where one of the aviation brigades was that was flying the longbow Apache. And we got some check rides and other things, which was great fun. But I was worried about this movie. What the hell are we going to do here? And how is it going to appear to audiences that we've got two behemoths facing off in midair? We never did get there. And we had a British director by the name of Green, who, frankly, just wanted to see shit explode. And he didn't care much about the rest of it. So it was a fight all the way through to try to and Tommy Lee Jones was excellent in the film. I'm a big fan and a friend.
Well, you worked with him previously with Oliver Stone.
I'm a pal of Tommy Lee's. So we were trying to make this something that it simply could not be, given the script and given the availability of things. But the Army was very good to us. They showed us all over Fort Hood and flew the helos for us, and took us. Then we went to Arizona to one of their test ranges that they'd have in Arizona, and we did some exciting flying there. And we had
actually, when I was watching the film last night, I recognized some of the area there, and I'm like, because if you didn't know that, I grew up in Phoenix.
Yeah.
And loved living down in the Southwest. And the minute I see saguaro cactus, I'm like, that's Arizona.
Where you are, yeah.
Yeah. But,
well,
it sounds like it was a Charlie Foxtrot from the beginning, though.
What's that?
It sounds like it was a Charlie Foxtrot from the beginning.
Oh, it was. And I'm surprised, actually, truthfully, I'm surprised we actually got it made.
And not only that, you got Disney to co-produce it.
Well, Disney bought into it later on, which gave us a little bit more money. But it wasn't the money that we needed. It was the story that we needed. And the story just wasn't there, in my view. The Army was great. They did everything we could ask them. We did a full outside loop in an AH-64, which I didn't know they could do, but apparently they can. And it was fun. And we got to fly some of their simulators and that sort of thing. But in the end, the Army looked great, and Army aviation looked great, I think. But the story just never was there. And then they complicated the whole story, as you pointed out. They complicated the whole story with the on and off love affair between Nick Cage and Sean Young. And I argued about that. I said, look, why do we need this?
They wanted a repeat of Top Gun, is really what it was.
Yeah,
and it was that Tom Cruise, Kelly McGillis thing.
Yeah, and the whole thing was distracting. And what I did like was, and you can help me out here. There was, at that point in the Apache technology, there was a helmet that they were wearing that was slaved to the weapon systems on the bird, and that was really interesting.
As I recall, and I'm curious about this too, Commander, that the eyes control the weapon and the head controls the flight, right?
Something like that. Help us out here.
It's how you're able to slew the weapon system, and how you're going to direct it. So you have the gunner in the front seat. You have your pilot in the rear seat, commanding the physical flying of the aircraft. Both can go back and forth. Both can change out weapons to engage. So and remember, the Apache. It's an incredibly interesting aircraft because the Apache was the answer to an Air Force RFI, a request for information, a request for proposal, and the Army put out a request for information, a request for proposal that was answered by the A-10. But because of some foolishness between the Army and the Air Force, and I have a foot in all these camps, Dale, because I was an Air Force guy that went to Fort Rucker for helicopter training.
Right.
And could never understand why the Air Force wasn't flying some Apaches to do some of the missions that we had, and why the Army wasn't flying fixed-wing aircraft. And then there's a whole bunch of historical crapple that's worthy of a movie of itself. It'd be pretty boring, except for about 20 people beside myself who would really like to watch it, about the stupidity about how we do that. But the early on part of the Apache, the way that weapon system worked, it was bridging from analog computers to digital computers. So there was a huge breakwater at that point when it came online. Advances made in that helicopter have had huge impact to a multitude of weapon systems.
Yeah, obviously. And the aspect that I found interesting was I began to talk to the pilots and the gunners that were flying these things. And I said, well, is there any problem with this? It seems like, as you say, a huge leap in technology. He said, well, it's a bitch to learn to use it.
Right.
Because
the big thing is they weren't using NVGs. They were using a integrated visual infrared system that projects up onto that lens of the helmet, which also allows them to wet. But as I was saying, that particular connection is now key to weapons like F-22, F-35. They're going away from heads-up displays They're putting more onto helmets, and this was the kind of foundational system that came out. There was even talk for a while that they weren't sure how they were going to split up the two roles between the cockpits. If you're going to have career front seaters and career back seaters, much like you have in fighter aircraft, where you have a weapon system or a radar interceptor officer in one cockpit and the pilot in the other. The Army, I think, did a great job working that out. I think they did a phenomenal job with bringing the Apache. The other thing that I will always give a huge pat in the back to the Apache is everyone said it would never work. It was just too intensive. Its logistics trail was too intensive. And when it went to Desert Storm, it did an absolute phenomenal job. In fact, it with the refinements that came out of there to where the longbow is today and its forerunners, anything that would have put it against the Hind, which was the absolute bogeyman of the 80s and early 90s, because it's a flying tank. It is the epitome of Soviet/Russian kind of approach to it. It could carry its own troops. It could carry its own munitions inside it. It really is an incredibly tough helicopter.
Yeah,
and
that's really what I wanted.
Amazing.
I wanted that helicopter facing an Apache longbow.
Absolutely.
And it was,
and
it would have absolutely ate its lunch every day of the week.
Just 2 years earlier, they had attempted that with Rambo 3.
Right.
And they took, I think it was a Sikorsky, and modified it to
it's a Puma. It's a Puma helicopter.
Is that what it was? A Puma?
A Puma. And what they did is they could only make it look like an A model. And that A model Hind has what looks like what we call the greenhouse cockpit on it. And that was envisioned when the Soviets first brought it out to have two pilots and actually like a navigator, third person in the flight crew. So the Puma actually flew better in its ability to maneuver. The Apache is the Hind is an extremely capable aircraft, but it doesn't maneuver worth a dog, and it's got an incredibly weak rotor head. And the only reason I know much about that is one of the missions that I ended up flying was simulating Hind tactics when I was in the Air Force. And we flew 53s for that particular mission, H-53s, and we had to limit our capability to make it an accurate portrayal of what the Hind would look like.
Yeah.
You couldn't exploit the full capability.
Well, I wish they had given you something like that, Skipper, because if you had something like that, because they could have done the exact same thing.
Oh, and that was always the vision. That's always what I had in mind. And I knew going in that if we couldn't get a Hind or something that would convince people it was a Hind and that sort of thing, that the denouement, the final conflict, was going to suck, like a big Hoover vacuum cleaner. I said, this is not going to be the payoff that we need here.
And we'd seen something akin to that before with Blue Thunder, because Blue Thunder was versus a Scorpion again, which was idiotic because they mounted fucking 50s on it, twin 50s. I'm like, you wouldn't put that on a Scorpion. Are you crazy?
Well, in Blue Thunder, that was an OH-6, not the BO-105.
Okay.
And it could put a pretty big gun pod on it. And they do put Gatling gun pods on that would be of that size.
Really? That thing would handle a 50?
Yeah, it's just remember though, when you're putting a 50 on it, how much ammunition you're carrying, how it's if it's going to be recoilless or how it's going to disperse its round energy. 50s were nestled 3 and 4 in some fighter airplanes in World War II. So
I know what they can do to a Huey, and it shakes the shit out of it.
Well, it all depends on how you mount it, and it all depends on the how much you're going to carry for it. And that was an Alouette that they used for Blue Thunder. And I talked to one of the pilots who actually flew it in the movie, and he said that was an absolute dog. The creativity, what they had to do in scene cutting for flying to make that look the way it did, because of all the add-ons they put onto that aircraft.
Right.
Sure.
But that is an Apache wannabe. The way they lined everything up, they unmercifully copied from the Army to make that look capable what the Army was developing for the Apache.
Yeah. And of course, the Apache had been around, I think, for 2 years or a year when it was still in testing, right? I think
Yeah,
80,
I think they were just starting to field it when that was coming out together. But
Yeah.
I mean, its concept was pretty well known, and obviously, the Marines were now starting the recapitalization of the Huey Cobra. Their whiskey models were starting
the hand-me-downs from the
at
Army.
that point. They hadn't even brought the Z model up, the Zulu up. So you had a lot of influence going on in both of those. Dale, one thing I wanted to bring up that you said, there's two things. This had to be one of the most, knowing you and knowing a little bit about the work that you've done, because I am an absolute geek when it comes to accuracy of military in movies. And I can explain a funny story about how I got to actually get to the epitome of my own personal journey on this. This must have been extremely difficult to keep your sanity going through it. To keep it on track and to get something that you wanted your name and your personal work to be associated with. But you did set a standard. You forced, I think, from this movie, one of its greatest legacies is that I think a lot of services paid attention to this movie and said, okay, you know what? We really do have to have the full story if we want to make it work. If we really want to make it more than just entertainment, but to tell the right kind of story.
Well, that's right, Cobra, and that had all been sort of prompted by the success of Top Gun and so on and so forth. But certainly the Army at this point, when we pitched for their cooperation in a thing, they understood it. General Thurman absolutely understood it. He said, "Look, if this comes off well, it's going to be great for us," and I knew that, and I wanted it desperately to come off well for the Army in this particular thing. It's the reason, once I realized that we weren't going to get a Hind to face off, and we weren't going to see the incredible dogfighting capabilities that good sticks in a helicopter can actually do, we weren't going to see a lot of that because we simply didn't have the enemy, the bad guy. But I thought, well, look, where else is there something? And this brings me back to this helmet system situation I was talking about. As I spoke to the air crews, they said, well, listen, the helmet thing is difficult to use. It takes a lot of practice, and you gotta. It's counterintuitive sometimes what your eyes and your head want to do, and you've got to work on it. I said, well, there's the answer. We can make a B story here about Nick Cage's character, who's having a hell of a time with this and is about to wash out of the program, and he gets saved by Tommy Lee's character, who's an expert stick and figures it out. And so we began to ask what the real problems were and how you use it and so on and so forth. And we invented this problem. We didn't invent the problem. We wrote it so that Nick Cage's character was having this problem, and by doing so, we explained, how a great helicopter mentor and pilot can help you through that sort of thing. And General Thurman and the Army loved that situation, so we were able to get that. Unfortunately, it kept getting interrupted, as we said earlier, by Sean Young and the whole
love story.
Yeah, the whole romance angle, but we did get that much in there. We never did get the final fight. We never did get the final denouement, Apache Longbow versus Hind 24 Alpha, whichever one it was, whichever version it was. And so it ended up that in this smaller, less capable helicopter carrying some fairly capable missiles, the bad guy is chased by Nick. Flying an Apache Longbow, and what you really see is some incredible flying, but you don't see the final face-off between the two behemoths, which is what I envisioned.
Now, going back to the beginning, you said that somebody came to you with the idea for the story.
Yeah.
Who was that?
It was two retired Army officers. By the name, one was Step Tyner and the other one was John Swenson. They were both light colonels, and had Tyner kind of thought he was a screenwriter, and Swenson was a businessman and understood financing and that sort of thing. So they came to me with this thing and pitched it, and then I helped invent the story, and it wasn't anywhere near the story that they envisioned, but it was the only way I could get Hollywood producers to pay any attention to the concept, because it was all Deus ex machina. You know, it was the big machine saves the day. But they came to me, and I appreciated it, and got them all screen credit as a story by and that sort of thing. But it was a fight, even at that. The producer, one producer in particular, I won't mention him because he pisses me off regularly, but one producer just absolutely refused screen credit. I had to go to arbitration with the Writers Guild to get the credit squared away for who actually came up with the story, which was me and Swenson and
Steiner. Yeah.
I might mention that not only have I never written another screenplay, I've doctored a lot of them and helped a lot of them, but from the get-go, I'm just not that guy, because I will kill somebody.
I will tell you, though, you wrote, because I wrote the first script for City of Fire.
Yeah.
But my script was based off of the actual incidents of that day. Whereas you went in there after we had our meeting, and you took the basic premise of what was in my script, and you did a Platoon with it, where you took all those other things that happened during that battle over the 2.5, 3 months, and you put it into the one day. And I'm like, I just kind of like shrugged and went, yeah, Dale Dye's script is a lot better than mine.
That's called script doctor, Gerry. But
Okay.
the business of coming up in whole cloth with a concept and fighting it through the financing and all of the, everybody's got to pee in the soup. Every cook in the kitchen has got to pee in the soup. And the next thing you know, you're in this agony. And I decided, I've got a more valuable and more productive thing to bring to movies than sitting here, on a keyboard and trying to conceptualize and invent these things. So the point of all of this is, it's the last time I did it. I said, that's not my milieu, that's not my bailiwick, and furthermore, it'll make me crazy. So I just went to straight advising and doing script doctor, fixing stuff that people needed.
And you've worked on a lot of scripts, including I don't know if I'm allowed to talk about this. I'll edit it out if you tell me to, but you script doctored that Spielberg series, sci-fi series, with the alien invasion.
Which one?
As I recall, I forget the name of the show now. Falling Skies. You script doctored the pilot episode.
Yeah, well, yeah. That was typical me. I'm the camel that gets his nose under the tent, and so I was originally asked to do some script doctoring, some help with the military subject of this science fiction film science fiction series called Falling Skies. And as I began to do it, I said, wait a minute, there's a role here for an old guy, who knows how to work on the camera and that sort of thing. And so as I script doctored it, I began to write myself into the thing. And that was fun. But that's an example, Gerry, of I didn't come up with that whole cloth. The other folks did, and I just came in and saved it.
You tweaked it, you fixed it, and you added that stuff. Now there's another one. I do want to bring it up because I'm very proud of the work I did on this, and I keep these with me all the time.
Oh yeah.
No Better Place to Die. My dog tag and the coin I helped design.
All right, that's the second one that I've created out of whole cloth, and I've been fighting that for almost 10 years now.
Never give up on it. Never give up on it. It will happen. I believe it will.
And I'm looking around for money. It's that with what things cost today. To do a movie like No Better Place, which is a World War II, 82nd Airborne sort of thing, a fight for the bridge at Lafayette,
right.
during D-Day landings. I got the concept sort of sold based on Band of Brothers, and I wanted to do for the 82nd what Band of Brothers kind of did for the 101st. And so I sold that concept, and it went through. It's still going through imaginations, because to do that film properly in today's money, today's cost is $50-60 million, and getting that raised on a World War II film with all the other problems that Hollywood's got right now, it's been a tremendous fight. I have stayed true to the concept. I know what the concept is. I know what the story is. And I'm not going away from that. Although I have changed the script, I think there's at least 8 versions of the script out there now. The story is the same. The characters are essentially the same. But I've had to noodle it, and I had to put a romance element in it and a number of other things.
Oh yeah, that was not in there when I
No,
storyboarded it.
it's in there now, and it has to do with a female French resistance fighter. But whatever it takes,
Oh, she was in the script. She was in there. I remember her. I drew her.
She's
And
bigger.
that's what I did, by the way, Commander, is I was the storyboardist and I did some production art for it.
Yeah.
But I don't know if I ever told you, Skipper, there are 3 scenes in that story that I know are true. That when I was drawing them, I had to get up and walk away a few times because I got so emotional just drawing it.
It's a good story, and it deserves to be made. And I think, if I don't die first, somehow I'll get that bastard made. And it'll be the second time I've actually conceived and written a film, which I said I wouldn't do after Firebird.
Right. But this one's a passion project, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Now, going back to Firebirds, you worked this up from, after working with the 2 gentlemen, Tyner and Swenson. And they were retired Army. Were they Army Air? What were they?
I can't remember exactly. I think Tyner was an aviator of some sort. I'm not sure. Swenson was not.
And you start working the script, and you took it to the 2 producer friends of yours.
Yeah.
When did it get serious? As far as really getting money and the energy started to build up.
I think probably when I began to explain the story as the 2 behemoths, the Warsaw Pact and the Apache Longbow and so on and so forth, clashing in midair and doing essentially
what is it, Rocky 4?
Yeah, one of them.
In the
4
air.
or 5.
It should have been Rocky 4 in the air against.
But I think it got serious. It got serious when we began to talk about that concept. And I began to explain some of the things that I had learned about the Apache Longbow and what I knew about the Mi-24, and it was, and the fact that Top Gun had done such money. I said, if you have to do a log line, it is Top Gun with helicopters, and suddenly everybody got serious. But they didn't get, the money was always short.
Sure.
Even the Army helping out, the money was always short. And that had to do with Arnold Copelson and Keith Parrish, the executive producers, who were frankly tighter than a popcorn fart. And, you just can't, they don't write big checks. They go get other people's money to use. And that's what they were doing while we were in the script machination. They were out there trying to raise money from other people to get this thing done.
Dale, my very limited experience in this world, I think a lot of people would love to know how this works. I think a lot of people think, well, you showed this to a director and a director is what drives it. That's usually pretty far down the line how that goes. You've got a producer who catches on to an idea that's sold on it. Now, obviously, we've said Top Gun a million times, and Top Gun completely just twisted everything on its head because the Secretary of the Navy at the time saw this as an incredible opportunity to really highlight and make a very substantial recruiting drive out of it. And I know the Army saw the same thing. But it sounds like you caught the attention of producers who weren't really so interested in the story beyond this, this very megalithic contest, this Titan versus Titan contest. And I always go back to the movie Get Shorty. And I've been listening to you, and I keep thinking about the scene where Travolta and I can't remember, Gene Hackman are sitting in the kitchen and they're talking, and Hackman goes, well, that's what I do. I produce motion pictures. And you've got 3/4 of a story. You've got an opening, you've got a kind of a middle part, but we need something for the ending. And they're talking about what's going on. And I don't think people realize that, there's a commercial aspect.
Sure there is. And look,
that concept, that idea has to capture the attention of people who grab the money and start throwing it against it.
Look, I get honestly about 4 or 5 letters with conceptual, this is a great movie. I did this in Iraq, and this is a movie, and you need to make it. They're clueless about the concept. But the business of taking a concept, a story that's in your mind, and going and pitching it to producers at one of the studios. Look, the studios don't make movies. They just don't. They distribute movies.
Right.
And independent producers are the ones who initially pay for the script to be made and so on and so forth. And then they take it to a studio to see what they can do to get a distribution deal. And movie making has come down to, at this point, what's called packaging. If you've got this concept, you've got this great story that's in your mind, and you know that if you could just get somebody to listen to you, the problem is getting somebody to listen to you, especially when you start throwing around figures like $30-40 million.
Sure.
So the way the game is played at this point is packaging. You need an A-list actor, or a couple of them, as insurance, to sign on and sign a piece of paper that's ironclad and says, I will do this. And then you need an A-list director, for the most part, who will sign on and say, I will do this. And then you start to get into the lower levels of producers, who are line producers, the guy who manages the money during the shoot, so on and so forth. He has to have a record that says he can deliver. And so that's really hurting cats. But once you get all of this under one umbrella, if you're able to do it, and it's very difficult to do if you don't have a track record to start with.
Right.
And that's the reason it costs so much and takes so long to get a simple idea turned into a movie. But that's the way the game is played. And the reason the game is played that way is because of the amount of risk. Look, showbiz, movie making, or television making for that matter nowadays, is the biggest crapshoot in the world. No question. And to improve the odds, the deal is you've got to figure out what do audiences like? What do they need? What would they be interested in? So you don't want to go with a story that isn't somehow in that milieu, because that gives the money guys reassurance that this might work. But audiences are fickle and extraordinarily fickle, and everybody knows that. So you may be talking this great game about this concept you've got now. Everybody's going to love it, and this is ripped out of today's headlines, so on and so forth. And the producer guy who's got the checkbook sits there and says, I don't know, man. I don't know. What'll happen if this, and nobody wants to spend any money.
Sure.
Without some sort of insurance or assurance that they're going to get that money back. And you got to triple it, on opening weekend, triple the expenditure on opening weekend to figure you've got a hit on your hands. So all of that goes into making a movie. getting a movie made. Making a movie is the simple part, really. It's getting the movie made, getting somebody to say, okay, I buy this, I get it. Here's some seed money, go out and get me the insurance, get me the actors, get me the directors. And if you're Joe Shit the Ragman, Rudy in the rear rank with a rusty rifle who's got this great story from Iraq, and you come to me and say, okay, look, isn't this a great story? Yeah, it's a great story. Absolutely great. Now, what the hell do we do with it? Well, you make a movie. Wait a minute. This is how that works. There are many, many slips between the cup and the lip. I mean, to do this story for you, Rudy, it's going to take me $30-40 million. Where are we going to get that? Well, that's the studio will give it. No, wait a minute. They're not even going to talk to me until I've got, all my ducks in a row. Can you, Rudy? Do you know the ducks? Can you go in there and get Tom Cruise or somebody else? Can you? Well, no, but you could. No, I can't, and I won't. So thank you, really, Cobra, for asking that question, because it's that difficult. It really is.
I have one follow-up to you. This is the only question I brought to the interview. So now you have another compounding factor in all this magic going on in these motion pictures, these movies. You have direct to video, direct to streaming now, which is, the independent folks still require all the things you talked about. Independent, if you were to do any of these movies and go through the independent, ultimately they have to hook up to some kind of major studio distribution in some format. They have to have that allegiance or connection. How much is that complicated what you're doing for work? Because ultimately the thing I want to squeeze the last part of it in is talking about accurately getting uniforms and insignias and tactics. That's the thing that Firebirds will never really truly be appreciated for. The accuracy that the Army brought to flying the aircraft stands the examination now today. They didn't put all kinds of crazy stuff in there. The maneuvers that they did were capable of being done by the airplane. It wasn't sleight of hand. And that's the kind of thing that always drives me nuts. But what about this independent and this kind of change in the competition added to the system?
Look, the big market nowadays is streamers, Netflix and HBO and Showtime and so on and so forth. They're the markets. They're the filmmakers, but they make them for their outlet, which is cable television or pay-per-view television. An independent, an indie, is cheaper, and it's going to show it. It's going to be cheaper because you don't have all the gear that and the CGI and all that sort of thing. Indies can be made and are being made, but they're the market in which they're sold, the business of the old video stores and so on and so, that's gone. So if you make an indie and the indie is halfway decent, you'll sell it, but you'll sell it to Showtime, Hulu, all these sort of guys, and you're not going to make your money back. You're not going to you might break even and may even make $1 or $2, but you're not going to get rich doing this. So those are generally, indies are passion projects. Indies are things that people have wanted to do for years and years and years, and they found an angel. That's an old Broadway showbiz term. I mean, somebody who's willing to write the check and take the chance on you. They're there and they're out there and they get made every day, but they don't get any recognition. They don't get the big splash open release and that sort of thing. So that's not where you want to go if you want to reach a huge audience. Now, theatrical, look, I don't know. It used to be that movies had several what are called price breaks. There was the initial opening in theaters, and then it was sold into for a debut on network television. Price break 2. Price break 3 was it was sold into one of the streamers. That's price break 3. Then it began to be available in the hotels, and it began to be available in it's all pay-per-view stuff, available on airlines and so on and so forth. So you had each of those price breaks, and at each one of those, you stood to make a little money, get back what the $30 or $40 million that you expended on this thing. The big thing was always the theatrical break, and you had to do well. You had to make triple your money on the opening weekend, and so on and so forth. That is really no longer the case, and that whether the big theatrical movies are ever going to come back, I don't know. It's all about audiences. Are we satisfied with our home entertainment systems that are 90 wide, and is that good enough? And is the sound system good enough? Or do we really want to go for that theatrical experience? Do we want to sit in the dark with strangers and eat popcorn and watch a movie? That used to be the absolute epitome of motion picture production. It's
and a
not
big part of society too. It was a big deal to go to the movies.
Sure. Yeah.
But we're seeing right now, because you and I talked about this before, Skipper, the ever-evolving landscape of the cinema. Because, and I'll just bring this film up, for example, because I sat down with some financial guys to talk about Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and how the 1990 film and the new one that just came out made about the same amount opening weekend. What is it, 30 years apart? Okay. And everybody goes, well, they're still getting people. I said, but what you're not looking at is the number of asses in the seats that equaled out to that amount of money. There is 1/3 the audience today going to movies anymore.
That's right.
And this is why, Keith and I, because you met my partner, Keith, he and I have talked about it ad nauseum, that we are slowly watching the murder of cinema because of mismanagement by studios. And I hate seeing that, because there's nothing more special than going to see a movie in a movie theater. It's been an experience that I've loved since I was a toddler.
Well,
and it's just
Gerry, I got to jump in. Can you imagine? And it's one of my favorite scenes in movies in the last probably 10 years. It was the story about Hitchcock. DiCaprio plays the role, if I have the movie correct, and he's outside the theater listening on Psycho, because Psycho is going to make or break him, and he's listening to the audience, and he's got the music, and he hears the scream, and he feels the electricity of everybody in the audience just completely lose their when they're watching this part of it, and he's jumping up and down like a little kid. That's how you're probably the last of the generation that really truly has that experience, probably from your youth.
Look, I've had that Hitchcock experience. I've been standing there watching some film that I was involved in and gauging the audience reaction. Saving Private Ryan is a classic example of that.
Absolutely. Tremendous work, by the way.
But I got to tell you, I don't know how much more of it we're going to see, and it has less to do with the theatrical experience than it has to do with the lowered expectations of audiences. Look, we're the prime audience, 25 to 35, 18 to 35, if you want to expand it. These folks are looking at they watch movies on phones, for God's sake, or on tablets. And that's good enough. That's good. They will trade the experience for the convenience. And that's not how we grew up. I mean,
and they're going to consume 2 or 3 movies in a given day if they have the time to do it.
Sure.
Or take one movie and run it over 3 days because they have the ability to stop and look at it and do whatever they want. Completely different than the model that still is how they're being made. And I think you see those changes.
Well, one thing for sure is studios have to stop the approach of throwing money at things, because making that money back becomes harder and harder for them. And one of the things I've always suggested, because you said like doing the war film that you feel the budget necessary to do it right would be $60 million, which Keith and I have always said that If you want a better chance at making your money back, you need to keep it between 50 and 60 million.
You do what?
In order, what Keith and I have talked about on the show is that for studios to have a better chance of getting their money back, they need to keep their budget. And I'm not including the marketing budget. I'm just talking about the shooting budget between 50 and 60 million. And the problem is we're seeing it go over 100 now for some of these films.
And that has to do with CGI costs and a number of other things. Look, I'm not sure how the whole thing is going to shake out, frankly. I do know that there's got to be a way to draw people back into theaters. I mean, if you saw the figures I see every day about theaters around the nation that are just shutting down,
right?
They can't.
Yeah, we lost one of our major ones right here in town.
Yeah. And it has to do with expectations. We've got to present audiences with some way. IMAX is not the answer. We've got to present audiences with some element of the viewing experience that is unavailable on their phones or on their tablets and so on and so forth. Or we've got to embark on a campaign. Now, this is where studios, remember what I said, studios don't make movies. They don't. They're distributors. Independent producers make movies and then take them and make a distribution deal with the studios. But one thing that the studios could do and would be, I think, well advised to do is to embark on some sort of campaign that talks about the theatrical experience. Use some creative people and talk about the legacy in American culture or in worldwide culture, if you will, of the theater experience. You took your girl, the first date you ever had. Do something like that gins it up again so that people are interested in that experience.
Make a recruitment film for getting people back in the theater.
Yeah.
I got to tell you, one of the models that I am most impressed with, and I've seen it successful almost every place it's been tried, are the folks that have silver screen or second screen theaters where they kind of have a little bit of a European model. There's a slightly smaller screening area that seats are more comfortable. You can order something to eat and drink and food. There's a little time before the movie starts.
Alamo
opening like that, and they're doing better.
And
so
and the cost to do all those things is half at most of what you would go if you go to a major theater. And I'm going to go one step further. In those theaters, I tend to see ushers from back, again, dating myself horribly here, Dale, because you're a kid, right? This is how it was back in my day. Yeah. If you were goofing off in the theater, you could be taken out of the theater.
Look, I think that's all part of, if I were the guy making decisions, that's all part of what I would be telling Warners and Sony and MGM and so on. I'd say, look, help us out here. Help us save the industry. Not only the filmmakers, but the exhibitors, the people who own these theaters. Help us out. And I'm not talking about spending money here. What I'm talking about is use your skill and your creativity to make the American movie-going experience attractive again. Now, part of it is the dinner theater sort of experience that you're talking about, where you can order a beer and talk to your buddies and you're secluded from disturbing that part of the audience. And all of that's great. And there are more and more of those opening up. But I just don't think that's enough. We got to also save the neighborhood theaters. We got to save the 300-seat mega minor plex that's in Tucson somewhere and in a neighborhood. We got to save those folks. And in order to do that, we've got to somehow make the movie-going experience out of the house in a theater. We've got to make that more attractive. Or attractive.
No, I agree with you there, Skipper, because the COOF really did so much damage to the industry, from the production to the distribution. with theaters closing, studios hurting. We got the strike going on right now. That's hurting everything. And I just I worry because I don't work in the film industry directly. I like the indirect way I work with it, but it'll go away one day if
Well, you're right. And look,
nurture
studio moguls are they were asleep at the switch. Absolutely decided that nothing would ever take away from that theatrical.
Nothing's going to change. This is
It's
a lot.
always going to be there.
it's forever.
Yeah, I mean, and then lo and behold, COVID and the pandemic and all that crapola it literally put paid to it. I mean, theaters immediately started shutting down because of social intermingling restrictions,
Distancing
and,
and all of that.
and they weren't prepared for it. Had no idea how to do, how to respond.
And but I do want to circle back around because I wanted to ask you with Firebirds, what would
Are we still talking about
what was your-
Firebirds?
Yeah, I know. I wanted to come back to it because there are still some questions I wanted to ask. How was it working with Sean Young in particular? Did you enjoy her performance in the film?
Look, I was a little concerned about that because she had a kind of a bad rep as the bad girl coming in. This is 1990 now, so
Yeah.
yeah.
This is after the
I know
incident with
that
James
I know
Woods.
yeah, and I know that Arnold Coplison, one of the executive producers, were worried about it, and he had to sign off on her being cast. But I got to tell you, she showed up at Fort Hood the first time I met her, and had her hair cut, to relative Army female standards, and she didn't really misbehave as I kind of felt she might. She didn't, and she was good to me. I mean, she came and asked me questions about, service in the military and that sort of thing, and I would take her aside and answer the question for her. And she seemed to absorb that easily. Is she picky about? I don't think she got along real well with Nick Cage, but that's not unusual. Very few people do. But I think she got a little prickly in some scenes with him, and I think that was just two egos
Butting heads.
knocking together. But she certainly was not the problem we had come to believe she might be.
That's pretty cool.
And I know her personally. She's just nothing but a sweetheart. She really is. It's so funny, because like she'll just send me a selfie. Just out of the blue, just shoot a selfie and send it to me. I'm like, God, she's so adorable. And not many people know it. She's got kids. She's got a family. She's got a happy life. And but everybody wants to they see that reputation, and it's not like it didn't happen. I know it happened. But the fact is
sometimes the odor of your crapola follows you.
Yeah.
That's why you got to be careful in show business.
Yeah. And of course, she had that issue with Tim Burton. But in that one, that's another story. Tim Burton threw her under the bus because he owed her. A lot of people don't know this. She was in the first Batman, and she broke her collarbone doing horseback scene. And she had to drop out, and they hired Kim Basinger to step in as her character.
Yeah.
With the understanding that when he did the next film, she'd come back, and then he ditched her. And I was like, oh, that was cold. But she is a sweetheart.
I can't imagine something cold happening in Hollywood.
No.
Yeah, the cold and aloof people. What?
Who'd have thought?
But
one more remark here on Firebirds.
Sure.
Yeah, because I have another question.
It was obviously a pretty tough project for you to go through. And one of the things that I really asked Gerry to let me sit in here with you, as I said before, is when I spoke to Michael Bay for the scene that I did in Bad Boys 2 with him, I went down and made all these measurements because I had seen what they had given me basically as the script of, they wanted us flying under bridges. They wanted us to do all these things. And I went and measured and see if that was possible. I had left the Air Force. I was now part of the Coast Guard. And then I had to go back to the Coast Guard and explain to them, yep, we can legally fit, we can physically fit and we can legally do this, all these things. So we were sitting there, Michael Bay, he actually had me call him Michael, and I had him call me my call sign, which is a variation of Cobra. And we talked for a couple minutes, and I said, well, it's really about accuracy that I really like to speak to you about. And we're in the room with all the other folks that are all part of that production. And he said, well, I don't understand what you mean. So I gave him a quick rundown of all the little things that were wrong in movies of his that I had seen that just drove me nuts. And I said, I'm not the guy who sits there and watches the credits at the end to come and talk to you. I want to see who your technical advisor is, because if I know that person, they're going to get an earful from me. And if I ever bump into them, they're going to get twice the earful if I ever talk to them. Now, he laughed kind of like you did, and he said, well, give me an example. So I shot off about 3 things before he could catch his breath. And he said, well, okay, what do you want to do? And then I explained, how we were actually doing the tactics. We were very new on what we were doing with this. And then I kind of let him into, here's some of the things that we're kind of confronting that I think if it shows up in the movie, you might actually help us get what we think is going to be the better tactics, the better things to do the business on. Next thing you know, he's got the script, the editor in there, and he brings in the storyboard person, and we work through it. And he actually signed me a piece of the storyboard and gave it to me as part of it. It was quite an experience, because he was really willing to go that part. And I always I give him a ton of credit for taking on 13 Hours, because 13 Hours was not a movie that Hollywood wanted, and he did a phenomenally good job to explain, I think, probably as accurate as you can get without breaking the rules on what the hell happened in that engagement. On Firebirds, you did an incredibly, I think, great service to everyone by maintaining and showing that the Army had really reached and where they were going with it, because it's a transformative period when the Apache comes online. The Army, the only other time the Army faced this kind of an issue is when they went to the H-47, which was a huge aircraft. You had detractors and other services saying that the Army couldn't fly it, that their pilots, they lack college degrees. There's a different way they're doing business. They can't get to this point to fly these big, complicated, technically in-depth aircraft. And here comes the Apache. And the Apache is really, as I said, a very sophisticated aircraft to meet an Air Force requirement that the Army gets because they're rotary wing. And I think the legacy there is that the accuracy and how it was flown and what it did stayed the course. And that's going to be timeless on this movie. Yeah, we can talk about all the other things that you have to do to make a movie that we don't like, but that was really well done.
Well, it's good to hear, because I pressed for it. I was sort of the liaison. The soldiers who were on set didn't know anything about talking to actors or any of that sort of thing. So they would come to me and say, we wouldn't do that, and I would go in, and I'd go in guns blazing, saying, hey, that's bullshit. We cannot do that. But I learned a long time ago, never go in and say no. Go in and say no, but, and offer an option.
Right.
And that's kind of what I did with the director. And I got most of those things accomplished. So we held the line for the Army there, and I was glad to. But we had some cheesy crapola in there that I couldn't believe in it. I tried to tell, this is last example, I tried to tell in the cartel attack on the airfield, which we shot in Arizona, they had explosions that were going to go off all over this field where helicopters were parked and so on and so forth. And I said, well, let me see one. And the special effects guy said, why? And I said, because I have seen what happens when you put gas bags in these things. And I know from painful experience that high explosive does not produce huge volumes of flame. It's dirt and black and so on and so forth. And I tried and I tried and I tried. And I said, that does not look anything like a high explosive round or a rocket or an artillery shell hitting. That just looks like some foolish gas bag that you put out there, as though they were firing napalm or some shit.
Right.
Right.
And I failed. I simply could not. The director went behind my back with the director of photography and said, never mind here. I want that big flame effect. And that's what we got. And I cringe whenever and I haven't seen Firebirds in a long time, but I cringe every time I think of that, because I saw it happen. And I said, that's it. That's in the film. I know it is. And even the soldiers who were down there with us looked at it and said, what is that? I think it's either a nuclear weapon or a napalm strike, but it sure as hell ain't HE. And they said, yeah, I know.
Yeah,
Anyway,
it's
sometimes
grenades.
you listen.
Hollywood's idea of what a grenade looks like when it goes off just cracks me up.
Grenades are
Flame,
not.
and I'm like, there's no flame with the grenade.
All right, what do you think? If I told you enough to piss you off here?
No, I'm loving it.
Far from it. I'm canceling
wanted to-
appointments on the other screen here, Dale, so I can keep this going.
I do have a question that deals with because I know when the military steps in, because I'm going to bring up another film, because you were initially involved with G.I. Jane, and a lot of people don't know that. And the reason why you had to step away is the minute the Department of Defense gets involved, private military advisors are out of work. So you did not get to be the military advisor on this film, or did you?
No, I didn't, and it was
because they were involved.
It was because of my objections that I raised.
Oh.
I've always thought that you can depart from reality all you want to, but you must start from a basis in reality, so that audiences can identify with it, and then you depart.
Yeah, you have to maintain the reality you create.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And we'd had a lot of meetings with both the Navy and with the directors, the Scots, and the idea was, I kept raising objections. I kept saying, look, there's only so far you can go with a female in this thing, and then you're way off base.
Yep.
And I think the fact that I kept objecting, and I wasn't an asshole about it, I wasn't screaming and pounding. I was saying, look, guys, here's an option. Don't do this, do that. I think that got in Ridley Scott's wheelhouse, and I think he said, well, I don't need this guy. I got this. And so the next thing I knew, I was unemployed.
That sucks. But, and I bet you one of the scenes you had a problem with was the SEER training scene. Because I told, people after I watched the movie, I said, that would never happen in a SEER training situation where he would practically have her bent over a table like he was going to do something. And I said, that would never happen.
No,
they're so under control in those SEER training situations.
Sure. I mean, look, Hollywood's concept in action is always more is better. And the problem is to pull them back, and say, look, the drama is there. You don't need to hit people right between the running lamps with it. The drama is there. Let it play. But that's a hard sell.
Yeah. Now, with your film, Firebirds, did you work as advisor on that at all?
Yeah.
Sounds like you had the official and the unofficial role there.
Yeah, I had them both. And
both.
Really what it boiled down to is, as I mentioned earlier, it really boiled down to me being the liaison between the Army and the director and the producers and that sort of thing, and trying to pull them back. And I was pretty successful with that, I think.
That's fantastic. Now, I'm going to mention another guy. I don't know if you've ever met him, Tyler Gray, that works on Navy SEALs, former Army Ranger. Have you ever dealt with him?
I think I know of him. I don't believe I've ever met him.
He did a great interview where he was talking about working on the show SEAL Team, or is it Navy SEALs? I forget the name of the show. Let me look at it real quick. SEAL Team is the name of the show. And initially, because it's a Paramount CBS production, what he ran into, and I'm curious if you ever had that experience, what he was talking about, where he said They didn't give two shits if they had the right uniforms. They didn't care if they had the right gear on. And so he was forced out of pocket to go to all of his team friends and borrow gear for the show in order to make it as accurate as possible.
I would never put up with that. But then I have a track record. I got a little more leverage than he has, maybe. Look, here's one of the things. Another thing I told you about people who come to me with this concept that they have a great movie in their mind, and part of the time
Right.
they do. I also get people who come to me constantly, and they've had, they've been 8 years in the Army, and they've been high speed, low drag, everything in the world, and they want to be a military advisor. You call it technical advisor. I've long since canned that. It's a military advisor. You do more.
Yeah, I get annoyed. It is military advisor, but they call it technical advisor on IMDb.
It's just an old Holly. I avoid the term. But the point I'm making here is that people think that, I've got this experience, so I must be able to go out to Hollywood and be the next Captain Die. Or, here's the thing: if all you can advise on is your experience as in an SFA team or in a SEAL team in Iraq or Afghanistan, and that's all you got, you're going to work once.
Yep.
And probably never again. My success is based on the fact that I'm a student, a scholar, and a historian, and I know it. If I don't know it all, I know who to call.
Right.
And I can do anything, and I have done. I've done everything. What is it, Gerry? We say we'll do everything from Star Wars to the Peloponnesian Wars.
Yeah, and the new logo that I did for you
I have
says that the sci-fi and the military,
ancient Greece, all the way to science fiction. But you got to be able to do that, and in order to do that, you can't sell your 3 tours in Afghanistan and I can do anything. Once you've done that Afghanistan movie, what do? You go out and wait tables, or you go out and get a job, become a cubicle rat, because there's not going to be another one of those movies coming along in the next 6 months or 6 years.
Right.
So you've got to find a way to be available and credible on virtually anything that has any sort of military aspect. And you've got to be able to say, and here's why. I know this. You can show it, and you can do it. And that's been the key to my success.
Dale, you have a passion, and I've recently become friends with Gerry over the last, I'd say 6 to 9 months.
I thought it was Gerry.
It's Gerry when I'm drinking, but it's early in the day for me, so I'm not Gerrying it right here. He made me pull G's on a recent show we were on, and that's what made my cheeks sag a little bit. And the Gerry came out. But you have a passion for, what you bonded a great deal of your life. Obviously, I mean, you spent time in the military. You were in uniform. And for folks that are in uniform, and I'm blessed to be with the two of you here today, because I think you know what I'm driving towards.
Sure.
It's not if you like the person next to you in uniform, but you are told that you love that person, and that means you're going to be willing to step into a fray. My first operational squadron CO, I remember being brought into his office for the welcome aboard, and this is how he leveled it for me. I want you to pick out the person that you like the least in this squadron. The guy that you can't stand, because it was just mainly guys in those days that were doing the flying. There was a few women pilots.
Right.
And I expect you, when that person makes a complete ass of themselves and is getting their ass handed to them, to step into the fray and pull their ass out of that and get them out of that situation.
Smart leader.
We were soldiers. It's about the person next to you. I mean, that is what happens. Now, that's what drives me nuts when I see movies when you do not allow that military advisor to help bring that portion out, because that bond is the only reason you're going to win any engagement you're in.
Look,
and that's why I think you had the success, Dale, and it's come through, and I think all the stuff that I know that you've done. And Band of Brothers, Yeah, absolutely. I bust up and happy and sad every time I hear your voice in Band of Brothers, which I go through all the time.
Well, thanks. But you're exactly correct, and I'm so glad to see that you recognize it. Although I would expect you to, and that's the reason for the Captain Stanislavski method. I mean, that's a reason I insist on training these people, putting them in that situation. Well, they'll understand just what you said. How it comes down to whether you like him or not, relying and trusting that guy on your right and your left. But in order to teach that, as you know from your own military experience, and Gerry, you know from your experience, in order to teach that, you can only teach it by example. You can stand up and lecture that crap for days. And it's yeah, okay, in here, out there. And then when you're actually in a situation, whether it's training or an actual combat situation, then you begin to understand it. Then it comes home. Once you've got that, you practically can't screw up your depiction of a soldier.
True. Very true.
Very much so. And it's always come through. And I, and I brought this up to Commander Cobra the other day. I said, I've actually been a fan of yours long before you worked in film, because my dad was a subscriber to SOF magazine. So I was reading it and I knew who you were, and I read your articles. I remember way back in 08, it was 08, right after my dad died, and I told you I inherited the entire collection of the magazines. And I said, my dad always, and I love telling this story. I said, my dad always said that SOF was a front for the CIA. And then you shot me that grin when I said it. And I'm like, oh, shit, it really was. You just grinned at me. And I'm like, oh.
Perfect misdirection, but also affirming, but putting doubt into you all one shot. Look at him now. Yeah. He's got that cute face on now, and I feel like I'm feeling my insides tighten up and get ready to pull some more G's again. Because here's another SOF reader from many years back.
But I do want to point out, I've been working for you since 06. We're almost at 20 years.
And thank God you have done. Some of the covers of our books have just been magic, and he's a hell of an artist.
Absolutely.
And the neat thing about it, when you talk to Gerry about a concept, if it's military, he gets it. Occasionally I have to kick him in the butt and move this and move that.
Twice you've had to correct me. I keep a count of how many times you had to correct me. I'm very proud of that.
Yeah, and that's great to have a guy like that on staff.
I got to throw a little humor in. I just got a cover. It's shown up like 4 or 5 times now in different places that I read. It's a book about the attack at Pearl Harbor, and the cover comes up and it's got German markings on the plane. Okay, now it's already in print.
Wouldn't happen with Gerry.
But then I said to myself, could this be the ultimate tie back to John Belushi in Animal House when he's going off on his rant about when the Germans bombed Pearl Harbor? Is this the ultimate expression of a movie getting back an ass kicker later on that, like myself and 3 other people, probably would remember?
But that's that kind of little pearl, that Easter egg in there that you pick up. That's great. Anyway, it wouldn't happen with Gerry.
No, yeah, here you go. I'm just going to give you an example. This is a cover I did for a Pearl Harbor book.
Ford Island right there.
Oh, yeah. Ford Island, yeah.
I've even got that dive bomber down here with a torpedo in the water right under it. Yep. I put all kinds of details into it. One that doesn't belong, but that's because I just wanted to put it in there, which is the memorial.
Right.
That's actually the Pearl Harbor Memorial down there.
Yeah, it's the Arizona Memorial sitting in Pearl Harbor.
Yeah, I know.
You get to do that, Gerry.
And then there's one of the pieces I did for Better Place That I.
Phenomenal.
I love that.
And I love the artwork I did for that, man.
Like
I said, the scene that really choked me up, by the way, is the bazooka scene on the road at the bridge.
And that all
when those 2 guys go up there, like R2-D2 and C-3PO, those 2 Tiger tanks coming down on them, bearing down on them, and just start firing one after another. I'm like, I had to get up and walk away, man. I get so emotional.
Yeah, and that actually happened.
Yep.
That was Heim and the Swede, I forget. But anyway, that's the kind of thing that guys like us immediately catch, and it's great stuff. So listen, are we getting close to?
I think we're done.
Okay.
I just enjoy talking to you so much. My relationship with your wife is so tight. She's like one of my best friends.
My relationship with my wife is so.
And often, for the last, 18 years, I have this relationship with you, but mostly my relationship is with your wife when I'm doing stuff for you.
She's brilliant. Julia's brilliant, and I don't know where the hell I'd be as the CEO of two companies. I don't know where I'd be if it wasn't for her genius and
the two companies being Warriors Inc. and Warriors Publishing Group.
Warriors Publishing, yeah. But I mean, and the neat thing is, much like you, Gerry, she gets all this stuff. So she's not a hired hand coming in to just run.
Well, secretly, she's got a PhD.
Yeah. Oh, I know that. But
I guess that's what happens when you marry your best friend, Dale.
You got it. But she's been brilliant in this, and the neat thing is she brings that. She has the same sort of passion that I do about these things. And so when we do a project, when we publish a book, or when we get involved with a movie, she gets it. She knows what I'm doing and why I'm acting like an idiot, and so she gets all of that, and that makes it fairly easy to work with.
Well, the next time I bug you, I will probably be doing it because we are planning to do a special on the Pacific, a whole group of us. And the group invited me in with them to do Band of Brothers, and I did that one episode. And I brought Julia on because you were overseas for the D-Day thing. You're in France.
Do it in a hurry because Netflix has just announced that they're rerunning the whole thing back to back, and they've optioned it. They're paying for it. So,
how are things going with Apple?
What's that?
Because I know there's interest in doing Operation Greyhound too.
Yeah, there is. I talked to, I don't want to name drop here, but I'm a friend of Tom Hanks, and I did Greyhound 1 with him, and he's now under exclusive contract with Apple Plus, and they want to do Greyhound 2, but I haven't heard anything much about it. I think everything's been just dead in the water over the strikes and that sort of thing.
Yeah, there's nothing happening right now.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me if that ever ends before the beginning of the new year. I might suddenly find myself.
In fact, they're shutting a lot of stuff down.
Yeah,
ending it, and they're looking at this as Hollywood's reset. They're using the strike as a reset.
Yeah,
which could be good for you.
It might. I might suddenly find myself with way more work than I want to do. But we'll see.
Well, my hopes
are too damn old to do this.
My hopes are that this gets optioned by Apple.
Yeah,
I would love to see that.
I've got a new money source. I'm tapping to see if I can raise what's needed. So we'll see.
Well, I'm so grateful that I have you in my life, Captain Dye.
Thank you.
You've been the best boss. And as I told somebody, there are only 3 people in this world that when they say my name a certain way, my ass clenches. One was my XO in the Army, Lieutenant Bose, my dad, and you. When you say Gerry,
those things were given too. If that doesn't confirm everything we just talked about.
It's when you say son, I know I've screwed up.
Okay, look, I got to run, guys. Cobra, it's great.
Right, sir.
Thanks for the
It's been a real honor to meet you and talk to you this way. Thank you so much, and thanks for all the work. Semper Fi.
Sure, Semper Fi, guys. Thanks very much.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.
Y'all come back now, you hear?
Thank you.